I want to mention for the record, there are two questions about Sfiras Omer which people don't ask. One of which I have asked for decades, and one of the other which I just came across with one of my chavrusos, and I'm putting them out there for people to maybe provide answers or find answers. Everybody asks why we count up and not down. So the Shechina talks about that, and there's a whole lot of discussion of that. What they don't ask is, as I saw in the writings of Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, they don't ask why we count in cardinal numbers rather than ordinal numbers. They don't say, back to school, hey, okay, you can Google it, look it up. Yeah, that's what they play cards with. They're the ones the birds sing. I'll explain to you. Cardinal numbers are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ordinal numbers are 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. We don't say this is the 7th day of the Omer. We say this is 7 days, plural, of the Omer. Why do we do that? If we're counting the days as they go by, after 6 comes the 7th day. It's a 24-hour period. You rip one page off the calendar. Why do you say this is 7 days of the Omer? That's a terrific question. Terrific question. Ask it around. See what you get. And the other thing, which I've asked for many years, is if you're counting the days as they go by, counting up, counting down, why don't you count at the end of the day as the day goes by? It goes by just before sunset. That's when it goes by. We count the beginning of the day. So you'll tell me, like the Gemara says, Rashi says, it says, Shabbos Mimos, 7 complete weeks. So you got to start at the beginning and go to the end to have the complete. Good, I hear that. The verse definitely implies that. But why? Why does the verse imply it? Why does the verse care? If you really give the explanation as you're counting them as they go by, you should be counting the end of the day, not the beginning of the day. So those are two questions which you should ask people, your aficionados, the ones with black hats. Ask them, what they say and see what they give you. Yeah.
So why, in the Shemona Ezra, why do we express our request of slicha to Avinu and mechila to Malkenu? Like, what is it?
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, in the blessing of asking for repair of our relationship with God after our doing tshuva, and we say, we ask for slicha, forgiveness from Avinu. That's how we titled God at that time. And we ask for mechila from Malkenu, our king. The answer is you have to understand what slicha and mechila are. And this is very exact. I think that this goes back to the Gra, if I'm not mistaken. Slicha is forgiveness, pretty much the way you normally understand it. Mechila is a term from Jewish civil law. If someone is obligated to pay me money, I can release him from that obligation. Mechila is releasing someone from the obligation he has. If I'm the subject to whom he has the obligation, I can release him from it often. So in the case of obligation, owing an obligation to your king, whom you have to serve, and he can release you from the obligation. Your father loves you, and what you want from him is to repair the relationship of a father and a son, not to pay up your debts to your father. You want forgiveness from your father. It's very, very exact.
So I asked this question within this particular caution because I imagine all Judaism can't be fit into a contemporary philosophical framework, but is there a particular metaphysical view that Judaism takes, such as dualism or idealism, and I'm assuming not materialism, but...
not a difficult assumption. Well, certainly it's dualism with respect to philosophy of mind, and that there's no question. There's another thing called the soul. It's an entity. It carries roughly what we would call your mental qualities, and it is not physical. And we have an interactive dualism. Certainly, I don't believe that the mental faculties of a human being are in the brain, neither hardwired or dual property theory in the brain. No. That's one metaphysical position we take. We're certainly against determinism, physical determinism. So is quantum mechanics, but we were against it long before quantum mechanics was invented. And for one thing, if physical determinism were true, there wouldn't be any such thing as free will. Yes, I know about soft determinism, and I know about people who think that you're free because you can do whatever you decide to do, even though you can't decide. It just happens. But that we are in that respect, in terms of the idea of freedom, is what's called libertarian freedom. It's the ability to do otherwise, all the way across the board. The whole thing didn't have to happen; it could have happened another way. And that the source of where it happens is in us. So that's certainly going to be against any kind of determinism. We're certainly going to be not going to be verificationists in the theory of truth. We're not going to limit truth by our abilities. A thing can be true only if we are capable, even either practically or even ideally, to ascertain its truth. Epistemology and metaphysics are distinct in this regard. Epistemology is about what you can learn, what you can understand, and what you can prove. And metaphysics is about what's in the world. And truth is something, the feature of the world, whether you get to it or not, understand it or not, can verify it or not, it has nothing to do with it. We're certainly objectivists about truth. I think there's a variety of philosophical positions that we are committed to.
We call the correspondence for truth, that corresponds there? What that is in particular?
I think that, let's put it this way, the truism that a sentence, proposition, thought, assertion, etc., the things that carry truth, that it's true if the world is the way it says the world is, we would affirm. Is that the correspondence theory of truth? Golly, it doesn't sound like a theory to me. Like something, you could have after the third beer in the bar, right? The theory has to have what kinds of elements are in the world and how they're related to elements in the proposition and with the denotation and the connotation and blah, 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 blah. That you could call a theory. But this idea that there is an external reality that determines truth, I think we would agree to that. But there are all sorts of niceties in the theory that we don't have to sign on to. But the idea that there's an external reality that determines the truth and falsity of what we say and think and assert and write, yes, I think we'll be committed to that. Yeah.
In the introduction to your book, you said there are many good books which refute supposed evidence against Judaism, like from biblical criticism, archaeology. Wondering if you could recommend any specific books on the topic.
Well, first of all, I would take a look at my blog. I have both recommendations for books and lots of articles which deal with these issues. It's on blogger.com, so you can.
I looked it up. I actually pulled it up on my computer. I don't know if I should show you now during the recording, but I'm happy to show you what I've found, and I haven't been able to find that many refutations, so maybe I'm just missing something.
Maybe. I didn't do a good job with the labels there. I didn't label them well, but there's a lot of material there. I have two books that I think are very good on biblical criticism. Very interesting. They came out within 3 months of each other, and they had the same title, written totally independently. And the title is "Who Really Wrote the Bible?", which is a play on Friedman's book, "Who Wrote the Bible?" One is written by two Jews in Los Angeles who wrote it together, and the other is written by a seminar student named Ford, a Christian seminary student. Both, I think, are very good. Ford, in particular, takes Friedman's criteria for distinguishing different authors and applies those criteria to Friedman's own book, and shows that by his criteria, 4 people wrote his book. That was a clever move on his part. But one of the things they talk about is chiasms, that is to say, there are certain literary structures which you find dozens of times, and the so-called critical theories divide the chiasms up into different authors, which means no single author had this. What you would have to say is there are different authors with different documents, and the editor sewed them together. They don't think the editor did writing. They thought it sewed it together, and he sewed it together in such a way that chiasm sprung out in the structure of the work, which is overwhelmingly unlikely. A chiasm is a mirror structure, so it's like A, B, C, B, A, and you have lots of structures like that, right? And the critical theory will tell you A and B and the last A come from one, and C and B in the middle come from somebody else. And there's no structure there at all. So that sounds to me like an extremely unlikely account of the editing process. And they all point out that the editor is totally unidentified. They have to speculate who he might be on the grounds that he might have had the qualifications to be able to do it. We trace the custom of washing your hands to who made it, but not to who unified the Bible. That's historically unbelievable for a culture like ours. I mean, there are many, many, many such failures. The most crucial failure, with this I'm going to go on to another question. The most crucial failure, I think, is this. Friedman, when I was coming from 45 years ago, 50 years ago, biblical criticism was a big deal, so I looked it up and I read the literature. And one of the things they said is we have independent criteria for identifying different authors, and they dovetail. They actually support one another. So there's contradictions. There are two parts of the contradiction come from different authors. There's redundancy, same thing twice, two different authors. Different styles of language, two different authors. Different conditions of composition, where the subject is due to the political circumstance of the time, different authors. And all these criteria dovetail in giving you the same arrangement of different authors in the whole text. That's what they said 50 years ago. Well, Friedman, in the latest magnum opus of his, in his introduction, reviews all of the evidence, says, gee, it didn't turn out that way. They don't agree. They disagree. If you use biblical style, then you have to cultivate contradictions. If you use redundancy, then you can't use political. It doesn't agree. And he realizes that's the difficulty. Sure it is, because these are the criteria for distinguishing. They don't agree with one another. That's bad, right? I mean, philosophy of science, logic. But he says, but the saving grace is that all the researchers agree on which ones to use when there's a disagreement. Number one, that could be just prejudice in the field. Number two, it isn't true. They don't agree. So I think the field turned out, it made a prediction, and the prediction failed. And therefore, I think the thing is a colossal failure. Anyway, our books, those two books are on the thing. And I think I mentioned Casuto's book as well, which I think is a very good source on the subject. There's lots of material on the subject.
Would you just mind repeating which books?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Which books you said? I missed which books you said.
There are two books who have the same title, called Who Really Wrote the Bible? One is by two Jews in Los Angeles, and one book is by a seminary student named Ford, non-Jew. I think they're both very good critiques of. Sometimes I hesitate to recommend Ford's book because he's a believing Christian. And the last chapter, he shows how, given this, he can understand the Hebrew scriptures in consonance with Christianity. Okay, obviously we're not going to sign on to that. So, it's a free world. If you don't have any scruples of reading it, read it or don't read it. I don't care. I'm interested in critique of biblical criticism, and the critique I think is very solid. Yeah.
You have to give me a minute for this one. Okay. So there's a grizzled general. He's looking at a field or a battle. A bird flies along. He follows it for a moment. He's taken out of the battle, and then he gets forced back to look at it. The idea is
look back at the battle.
Look back at the battle because of where the bird flies. And the idea is human beings are wildly sensitive. Hashem created us that way, and He created that bird, with these properties such that it would be able to simulate this effect in him in that moment. Mainly why this kind of concerns me is that because we're so aesthetically sensitive, maybe if the night was different, then Starry Night would have never been, the night Starry Night was inspired, it would have never been made, or it would have been fundamentally different. Because we're so sensitive, and there's these other dimensions where meaning might require different construction, like say how animals have midot examples, so they demonstrate to us how we should behave in some cases, and we can learn from them. It's just hard for me to see a situation where something really has just pure room to be mikre, right? Pure chance, because there's so many different ways in which Hashem might see that this particular thing can be orchestrated to this way because it affects our trials, it affects our behavior, and how we're supposed to react to our moral challenges in life.
I'm not exactly clear on what proposition we're considering. Now, you could, here are two possibilities, and they're linked in a way, but this linkage is kind of subtle. One is it possible to take any particular thing and show that there are circumstances, there could be circumstances constructed around it where it could make a difference? I think that's probably right, because in the question you're allowed to construct the circumstances for each thing that you consider. Second question is it a fact in our world with all the particular things in it that all of them have such circumstances which are constructed around them so that they have significance?
I don't think I need the question to be that strong. I just don't want to call something mikre when it isn't, right? I don't want to miss the window.
Okay, so now we're another subtlety, whether we're talking certainty or we're talking possibility. In other words, you want to say that anything that could be certain, but might not be, it could be, you want to call it mikra and classify it as mikra, as chance. You don't want to take that chance. I think that's probably right, though I can imagine circumstances where things interact with your body beneath the threshold of stimulating nerve endings. And that means they're not going to cause any sensation whatsoever.
That's fair.
Could there be something else that works with, with pigment? I mean, you could construct the circumstances, but do I have any reason to believe that God constructs those circumstances for every possible variation in physical input so that they all have significance? I have no reason to believe that he does. I would love to find a proof that he can't. I'd love to find a contradiction in the idea. That was my goal, that I haven't been able to do it. As I told you, the exact distance between every two letters on a Torah scroll, there are 300,000 plus letters in the Torah scroll, and the exact distance between every pair, and then you could do it for triangles. The volume of the triangles are the lines linking through trios, and so forth and so on. Every one of those facts has a significance that would change the outcome of the world in some significant way. I find that very, very hard to believe. But I'm finding it hard to believe, maybe just the poverty of my imagination, I don't know. I haven't been able to, I would love to have a proof one way or the other, and I've not been able to do it, yeah.
Did Moshe Rabbeinu know everything at the receiving of the Torah, as in the amount of planets in the solar system, or how many grains of sand they are, or how fast it takes for paint to dry, these things?
At one point in time he did. That's B'chol Beis Inem, according to Rambam he did. B'chol Beis Inem, he knows how the whole of the creation works. Everything that it is and all the property that it has, all the interactions that it has, the Rambam says, he knew all of it. And therefore, says the Rambam, when he asks, show me now your ways, he wasn't asking for new information. What he wanted to know was, I'm functioning as the ruler of a nation. Which ways among your ways are the ones that I should use in ruling the nation? That's the 13 attributes. By the way, we talk about the 13 attributes of mercy. Rambam does not have the term of mercy. He has 13 attributes, the last of one is not mercy. It's punishment. It's 12 mercy and 1 punishment. But there couldn't have been anything else to ask for that was new, because he had it all. He knew the whole of the creation. That's what he says.
At one point you said, or
Well, I don't know, you said after he got the Torah. I don't know, before he got the Torah, maybe he had it, or only 3 years afterwards, or when, I don't know the time frame. But I know he's described with those words. That's a description which says those words. And that was before he died, of course. Yeah.
I've heard you all mention Shir, saying the Shechina is a nivrah. What that actually means.
The Shechina is what? I didn't hear the word.
Nivrah, that was the word I think you used.
Yeah. Well, I was quoting the Rambam there. The Rambam says it.
Is that actually what we hold?
I don't know there's a we. There are different views. I was quoting the Rambam there. He says it specifically, and he also says it as a speculation. That word can refer to either a created thing or something that Hashem does, or a principle by which he manifests himself It's used in different ways, and different commentators take it in different ways. So I wouldn't come down hard and fast and saying, we hold. And there may be differences in different contexts. It's possible for the same person to say in this context it means this, and that context it means that. So I don't think we should think of a hard and fast answer to that question. Yeah.
Is there a classical explanation to why the written Torah almost never discusses Olam Haba and instead focuses on rewards and punishments in Olam Hazeh, even though Olam Haba is like more than 1 billion times, more significant than Olam Hazeh?
Yeah, there are many classical explanations of it, but before we get to explanations, I want to question the question for a moment. We're talking about why something isn't greatly emphasized. There is the idea of, let's say, the life of the soul after the body. That is written explicitly. But why it isn't greatly emphasized, the reward in the world to come, in the written text of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible. Now, I want to ask you a question. The 5 books of Moses, we talk about an oral tradition. Which came first? The oral tradition associated with the 5 books or the 5 books?
Oral tradition.
Oral tradition.
Which came first?
I'm guessing the 5 books.
Yeah, that motivates your question, but it's backwards. The oral tradition came first. That's explicit in the Torah. Moses wrote down the 5 books just before he died. So there were 40 years of oral instruction before the book came into existence. So a great deal of information they possessed because they've been taught it for 40 years. And to say, why isn't it written down, is simply to take the Christian point of view. The book is the book and everything else is fluff and made up. Well, okay, you could take that position if you want, but it's not our position. You're asking us about the nature of our position. That's why the oral tradition isn't really mentioned in the written, because when they received the written, it was in the context of 40 years of the oral. So then the question is, the material that they got from Moses included the oral and the written, and it's a sum total of which all of it was in their possession. And the question of why one subject is more in this one rather than in that one is not such a pressing question. If you thought it was made up later and invented later, so on and so on, then you might have a question. It wouldn't come from Sinai; it would have to be something that was intuited or whatever. But since it all comes from Sinai, it all comes from God, it's not such a terribly pressing question. One answer that's given, it's implied in the Rambam, in the very end of the Mishnah Torah, is this. Let's imagine that you're a surgeon, a world-class surgeon, and certain types of surgery that only you do, and Einstein has a hemorrhage and has a brain injury, and only you can fix it. So they bring him in, this is Einstein. They say, okay, it's fine, I've chosen to do the surgery. Now, when you're piercing the skull, when you're tying off the blood arteries, when you're checking which parts of the gray matter to cut, not to cut, are you thinking about Einstein's next presentation at his conference, the fame that you'll get in the New York Times for the work that you're doing? You better not be. You better be thinking about the artery. You better be thinking about the gray tissue in front of you. Otherwise, you're going to be a failure. Dreaming about what will be after a long period of time in an entirely different state of existence is something which will distract you from the hard work of getting there. Getting there means focusing on this world. So the corpus of information written this way. A 2-page preface, all of this for the sake of the world to come. And the preface, 4,000 pages of what to do here and now. By the way, the ratio of eschatology, study of what happens in the end of days, as against how to deal with this world, in both the written and the oral is about the same. In 5,400 pages, 2,700 leaves, tapim of Gemara. Out of 5,400 pages, there may be 100 that deal with the eschatology, and the rest deals with the here and now. So the whole attitude is, you should know in general that's the goal, and now pay attention to the means. That's where your focus should be, and that's number one. Number two, when you talk about reward and punishment, Torah is not reward and punishment at all. The Rambam writes about this in the 9th chapter of Hilchos Shuvah. It is quite clear that the good things of this world that you receive are an investment in your increased productivity of conditions for a better world to come. And the bad things of this world are crippling factors which will make it harder for you to do the work of investing in the world to come. They are investments in your future, positive and negative investments in your future. That's not reward. Reward is dictated by the past. You've earned it and you get it and it's yours. They aren't that. Take a look at the 9th chapter of the Laws of Repentance by the Rambam. Yeah.
In the Rambam, I think it's 18.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting your words.
Chapter 18 of, I think, Mesilas Yesharim.
Yes.
Which is the purpose of life is to develop a relationship with God.
He doesn't say those words. What he says is to give God Nachas Ruach, to give God, so to speak, peaceful spirit, whatever that means. Okay, so there's a crucial thing to I don't know if it's what you're really looking for or what you're alluding to, but it's very important to know. I heard this in a tape from Yaakov Weinberg of the Israel in Baltimore. In the first chapter, he says, the Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just, so-called. He says, a person has to know what is his obligation in his world. And he says the answer is that God created man for his existence in the world to come, and therefore man's obligation is to do whatever will get him to the world to come. Chapter 18, he says, the chassid, which is the higher rank in Mesilas Yesharim, the Yesharim is about the tzaddik in the chassid, and the chassid is the higher rank. His motivation for serving God is to please God. Let's put it that way, Nachas Ruach, to please God. So Rabbi Weinberg said, at superficial first glance, which shouldn't be the way that the critics operate, but that's how they operate. At first glance, it's just an open contradiction. The first chapter says you should be doing it to get to the world to come, and the 18th chapter says you should be doing it in order to please God. So he mocked it, and he said, let's imagine the Chafetz Chaim gets up in the morning, read the first chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim, and he looks in the mirror and he says, listen, don't be a fool. Don't go after the small, trivial pleasures of this world. Go after the big pleasure. The big pleasure is the world to come. Don't sacrifice the lesser for the small. Sacrifice the lesser for the small, the greater, and not the greater for the lesser. Is that the way you think of the Chafetz Chaim? Thanks God for giving me the keys to the kingdom. I'm going to have a great time. Probably not. But if you pay attention to the words, which isn't common, the first chapter doesn't talk about your motivation for what you do. First chapter talks about what you have to do, not why you're doing it. What must I do? What is my obligation in my world? My obligation is to do what God wants. That's my obligation. He created the world, so I will go to Olam Haba. Therefore, I'm obligated to do the things which will get me to Olam Haba, because He sets the rules. He creates the obligations. That says nothing about my motivation. That's not a question about my psychology. It's a question of what I must do. Chapter 18 talks about the ideal psychology. Ideal psychology is to please God. The Nefesh HaChaim puts it in a certain way. Is it appropriate to serve God to get to the world to come? Well, the Rambam says absolutely not. But the Nefesh HaChaim says it depends on how. If you serve God because you say, I want the world to come for me, I'll enjoy it, and therefore I'm doing it for my enjoyment, that's forbidden. But if you say, I'm serving God to get the world to come because that's where He wants me to go. If He wanted me to go and live in the field, I'd be doing that. I'm doing it for Him. I'm going to Olam Haba for Him, not for me. That would be okay. The Rambam, when he says don't do it for Olam Haba, means don't do it selfishly. But you could do it for Olam Haba not selfishly, because He wants it. That's what 18 is talking about, the type of motivation that you have. Now, if you ask, please God, can you please God? Does God have emotions? Does it make a difference? So that's a big question, and I'll just say that the Torah presents God to us on two different levels. One level is, so to speak, more internal, fundamental in terms of identity, and the other is in terms of manifestation and interaction. And strictly speaking, manifestation and interaction are what we can describe. We can't describe the fundamental and absolute the internal at all, though we use terms that are understood negatively. It's a whole tricky thing in the Rambam's usage and the Ramchal's usage. If you say that something's perfect, having no, lacking nothing, and having no chesronos are things that are missing, that's really the concept in Hebrew. But having no failures or weaknesses or limitations, and you take those words as they are linguistically, negatively, so limitations, no. Failures, no. Missing, no. I didn't say any yes. I didn't apply anything but the yes. I simply said, these are not applicable, don't use them. That you can do. But that's all that you can do. So now, this idea of pleasing God starts from the idea that he created the world for a purpose. And he put us in a position to move that purpose forward. An agent who does something for a purpose wants that purpose to succeed. And if we move it forward, then we're doing what he wants to happen. That picture is the framework in which this phraseology can be used. Is that the whole story about God? No. Is it the most fundamental side about God? No. But that's to make it false. It's a partial picture. By the way, Rambam, as usual, there's a verse that says, Moses says to God, show me your ways, which he understands as the ways in which he operates, what he does in the world, principles of action, right? And he says, my mind says, you can't know what he is, you can only know what he does. And then he says, what's the next words in the verse? And I will know you. Says the Rambam, when you know his ways, you know him. It's not a different subject. You haven't decided to talk about fossils instead. Do you know everything? No. Do you know the essential parts? No. But the subject is him. That's something else. That's a very important remark. And the verse says it. You can't avoid it. It says, show me your ways and I will know you. I will know this about you. You are the subject of my knowledge, though the quality, the information that I get is limited in certain ways, but I'm not talking about something else. That's a crucial idea.
So, couple things quick. One, if we find, looking through Torah, is that like a rubric by which we can distinguish what we're talking about when it comes to Hashem? So, for instance, if it's something described negatively, right, like he lacks for nothing or so on, we could say, oh, it's talking to the best of its ability about the absolute Hashem, versus when it's describing something positive, like he is this, it's talking about a manifestation. And then otherwise, if we describes his goals, or if it describes something he's after, could that also, within the Torah, could that also be a description of his absolute self?
Oh, that is a very nice question. You're trying to use the quality, both the type of language and the type of information to distinguish what we're talking about. Well, the first 2 points I think I would agree with, but not the third. Yes, the positive side will be descriptions of his modes of action, unless the positive is just meant negatively. For example, one way that some people, maybe the Rambam sometimes takes echad, saying he's one, is to mean not many. It sounds positive, but it's meant negative. So that you can have that possibility. So the type of language isn't always a good guide. But purpose is a tricky concept. Here I'm telling you something which I believe is true because I know something about philosophy of action. Have I ever seen this in our sources word for word? No, but I think it's implied. So I think I'm on reasonably safe ground to say this. What is an action? And how is an action different from an event that just happens but isn't an action? To get it vivid, imagine an actor who's a very, very good actor and who acts out accidentally falling. So you watch him, he tripped over that crack in the road and he fell. But he didn't, because he's an actor. The motions of his body are exactly the motions of someone who trips and falls. So what's the difference? The difference is that he chose to do it, and he trained himself to control his muscles to operate in this way. And somebody trips and falls, would have rather not fall, and is failing to control himself and falling against his will. And although the motions are all exactly the same, the internal character of what's going on is entirely different. So one thing you have is will and choice that's behind an action. But now I think it's more than that. It's not just will and choice. Imagine your body goes through a certain motion, and I ask you, why did you do that? And you say, wrong question. Wrong question. Doesn't apply. Really? Doesn't apply? Not relevant? Well, if you tripped and fell and somebody said, why did you do that? You'd say, I didn't do it. It just happened. I wasn't doing anything. I didn't have any purpose. I wish I hadn't fallen, right? Or a muscle spasm or whatever it is. Or a cough or sneeze. And even if he says, why did I do it? Because I wanted to do it. That's a purpose. Only the purpose is not doing A to do B, to achieve B, doing A because I wanted to do A. A was my purpose. But if there's no purpose, it's not an action. So when you talk about purpose, you're talking about something that's internal to action. It's internal to the action. If we're told we can describe God's actions, automatically we can describe his purposes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to describe any actions. They wouldn't be actions. They'd just be happenings. Now, that doesn't mean that he couldn't have purposes that don't show themselves in action. You can have purposes which are ultimate purposes, and the purposes in action only means, and so forth and so on. But you can't eliminate the category of purpose from the description of God. If you're going to describe his actions, you're automatically going to be describing some of his purposes. So you can learn something about his purposes without learning anything about his essence. This is what an aspect, the action is purpose-oriented. That's one of the defining characteristics of an action, that it's purpose-oriented, and that being the case, you can have information about his purposes without attributing it to his essence. And you better be able to, because it's positive, it's not negative. So you better be able to do that. But I think that's a very important point. I haven't seen it discussed in our literature, but I think that we all agree that because Kadosh Baruch Hu describes his own actions. By the way, these descriptions we have because he told us, not because we figured it out. We didn't intuit it, we didn't theorize it, hypothesize it. He told us, but we have to be able to understand it. The question here is, can I understand what I'm told? And that's what I'm addressing. Yeah.
Did the Rambam know Kabbalah?
One of the classical commentaries on the Mishnah Torah says yes, word for word, the first page. Many disagree. I think that it's possible that he could have known it without revealing it. I have a piece of evidence, a fairly weak piece of evidence, but I haven't seen it brought down by other people, so I'll mention it. We have in the Kabbalah gigantic literature on reincarnation. This idea was discussed 100 years before the Rambam by the Saadia Gaon, and he rejected it with two hands as a non-Jewish doctrine. Had no place in Judaism. Okay, that's 100 years before the Rambam. Okay, Rambam wasn't shy. He takes on all sorts of subjects, and he's willing to say that certain statements of the Talmud he disagrees with because other places he disagrees with, he sides with this, against that one, and so on and so on. Right? He never mentions it. I find that very intriguing. He never mentions it. There are things that he took positions against because he thought that Jews believed in them and he had to correct them. Saadia Gaon rejected it because he felt the same way. Rambam doesn't mention it. I'm suspicious. Given his predilections and his general corpus, he should have mentioned it and rejected it, just like the Saadia Gaon mentioned it and rejected it. Since he didn't, I'm suspicious that maybe he didn't want to go on record to reject it because maybe he was impressed by it. But I have no direct proof of that. So the Migdal says that he did have no Kabbalah, and I think most others would say that he did not. Yeah.
The Rambam, in his Guide to the Perplexed, says that the sages of the Talmud could be mistaken about scientific matters. Is this an acceptable position to hold nowadays?
Absolutely. It depends upon what they said. There are two types of statements in the Talmud, and the other Rishonim agree also. There are two types of statements in the Talmud in scientific matters or general matters. One is where you have an idea that's traced back to verses that come from prophecy. That's off limits. It's true, capital T, no matter what. Now, what you see, what you hear, and what calculations you do, experiments you do, too bad. Sorry, we're not negotiating that. And the Talmud actually discusses this, where the Talmudic scholars were attacked by Athenian scholars in one case, and various items of this kind, and they gave not an inch. Not an inch. On the other hand, the Talmudic scholars sometimes took from the knowledge of their times. And when they did that, what they say has no more authority than the people that they took it from. Now look, people ask this question as if it was somehow special. Could they make a mistake about scientific matters? Let me ask you a more direct question. Could they make a mistake about religious matters? What God wants? Could they make mistakes about that? Is that a tough one? What happens if they tell you they made a mistake? What do you do then? Well, there are numerous cases where Talmudic sages say, sorry, I made a mistake. So they could make a mistake about what God wants. Why couldn't they make a mistake about what animals do? Or what sand does when you heat it, or so forth and so on? There's no claim of infallibility here. It's nuts. In fact, one of the Talmudic sages did a certain experiment to discover the social nature of ants. And I think it's Solomon who says the ants don't have a king, and he wanted to find out whether it was true or not. And he did an experiment with shade and the sun. Tosfos says he did the experiment to find out how Solomon knew. Solomon, the holy Solomon. Surely he got it from divine inspiration. Surely he got it from the verses of the oracle values. So, no, according to Tosfos, he did an experiment. That's how he knew, and that's why he put it into Mishlei. So, I mean, could there be a mistake? Yes, Solomon could make a mistake also. Sure he could. So the idea that mistakes could be made, I'll give you one more example, which Meisman has in his book directly. Treifa is a condition where a person cannot live for a certain period of time. He's going to die. Person or an animal. And there's certain laws that apply to people and animals in that condition. Now, treifa for an animal are 18 criteria which we have in the Mishnah, which come as an oral tradition from Moses. They can't be wrong. Treifa for a person is defined legally as what the contemporary medical experts say about life. That's how it's defined legally. And that definition can change over time. And when it does, then the halachic definition will change. So you find the Talmud says this is a condition of a human treifa. And your times, it's not treated as such. That's perfectly acceptable because the legal definition of what they're doing is checking the contemporary scientific sources. And that's what they did. So this idea that they can't make any mistakes is just...
I think there's a distinction, though, between if individual sages make a mistake in religious rulings or if the Talmud itself makes a mistake. Because, I mean, it seems clear that they have to make mistakes if they disagree, but I think the consensus, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Talmud will arrive at the right religious conclusion. That will be the consensus. Even if individuals may... Let's see now.
Talmud will arrive at the right religious conclusion. I wonder what right means here. How about the Sanhedrin? Should we say the same thing about the Sanhedrin? Sanhedrin is even greater than the Talmud, right? But we have a Masechta, one of the tractates of the Mishnah called Horius, which explains what happens when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. I suppose the Sanhedrin could make a mistake, and the Talmud could also make a mistake. Talmud isn't stronger than Sanhedrin. So I guess that's not quite the right view. What you're confusing, and I meant to hint at this before, is the difference between being right on the one hand and being legally binding on the other hand. Those are two separate issues. What happens when a Sanhedrin overrules itself? In 1 year they say X, 20 years later they say Y. What's somebody supposed to do in between? Suppose in between he follows X. What do we say about what he did? Well, what we say is he had to do X, If he had not done X, we would have punished him for violating, for going against the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin made a mistake. So what? He had only that ruling to go on. That was the binding ruling. Later on, the decision was that they made a mistake, and that has to be rectified in certain ways. So you have that kind of thing all the time. Now, the Talmud, there isn't anyone post-Talmud who has the authority to change the ruling. That doesn't mean it's true or right or infallible. It just means no one later has the authority to change the ruling. And by the way, this is the only compilation of Jewish law that has that distinction. The Mishnah predates the Talmud by over 300 years. The Mishnah was challenged and revoked by later scholars. They challenged it and they ruled against it. And we hold against the Mishnah. We hold like the later scholars. Every later compilation was challenged in various cases and rejected in various cases. The only one has this distinction is the Talmud. And that's because of two reasons the Rambam describes in detail, but it's a question of authority, not a question of rightness. One is a legal concept and one is a metaphysical concept. They're two different concepts. Yeah, what else is in people's minds? Yeah, in the back.
What would be considered sufficient proof to be allowed to interpret a pasuk allegorically?
Sufficient proof to interpret a verse allegorically. I guess it would depend upon what kind of verse it is. You have to distinguish right away between narrative and
Not a commandment.
I'm sorry?
Not a commandment.
Not to...
Not a commandment. Any verse but not a commandment.
because some people want to, some commandment verses are interpreted allegorically. So, it says, circumcise the foreskins of your heart. Now, if you know a little anatomy, the heart actually is encased in a membrane. But the pasuk is not commanding open heart surgery where everyone will die. That's not what it's about. So it's a statement about attitudes and character development, so forth and so on. And those words are a command. So that's not dialogue. It's not narrative, right? If you're talking about narrative, so then there are a variety. I don't know if I can give a full list and a full definition, but for example, you have verses that explicitly contradict one another. Or you have a verse which contradicts what you know from your knowledge and the knowledge of the text also. How about this? He called her name Chava because she was the mother of all life. Oh, yeah? The mother of turtles, which are alive? We're talking about Eve, right? The first woman. Okay. It doesn't mean animals. Even though it says called Chai, that doesn't mean animals. Okay. Was she Adam's mother? Was she her own mother? Well, we don't mean that, I mean, use your head. Think about what it could possibly mean, So you have to ask yourself, what the criteria are for getting something right? So now, in those kinds of cases, you do something. You do something. Now, the last thing I'm going to say before the next question is this. There are really two different kinds of things to do, and it's crucial to distinguish them. Rabbi might as well put some effort into this. That makes a big difference. One is allegory, and the other is, let's say, figure of speech, like simile or metaphor or exaggeration. You start with the principle that a verse is true, but then you have to ask, what does it mean? Now, there are two ways of questioning what it means. One way is to look at the words and say, are the words meant literally? The Torah refers to cities fortified to the heavens. I have to ask, does this mean 400 miles high? God can do anything. The ancient Canaanites could do anything? Probably not. What am I supposed to think, right? The answer is it's metaphor. Moses' Torah tolerates metaphor. It does. Metaphor can include exaggeration. There are a number of cases where the commentaries say that the words in the Torah are exaggeration. They aren't meant literally in that sense. So, is the verse true? It's true. You just have to be careful. What does it mean? Fortified to the heavens means something like, when you looked at it, you were so overwhelmed that you felt nothing insignificant. You couldn't imagine attacking it. You were just paralyzed with fear over its power. Right? That's true. That's what it was. And fortified to the heavens there means that. That's one way to do it. That you have in Moses' Torah. Allegory is something else. Allegory is where, let's say, the verses tell the story. Every word means exactly what it means in the dictionary. A 10-year-old with a dictionary can get the correct meaning of all the sentences in the story. But then the question is, what is the intention of telling the story? Is the intention of telling the story to record actual incidents in the world? Or is the intention of telling the story to communicate a moral or something else? The words mean what they always mean. When you read Aesop's fables, it's not that we treat the words as similes and metaphors, exaggerations. No, the fox saw the grapes, the fox was hungry and starved himself to get through the crack in the rocks, and then he got in and he ate the grapes, they couldn't get out, he came out, he was just hungry as before. It's a story about a fox and grapes and a crack in the wall. That's what the story is about. What does it mean to communicate to you? Nothing about animal husbandry. It's not about how to treat animals. It's about human beings and pride and ambition and so forth and so on. So there's a difference between the two of them. One is where you have to adjust your understanding of the meaning of the words and the verse to understand what the real meaning is and find out, but it's for sure true. And the other is where you're told the whole story. The whole story isn't true. The whole story isn't true because it wasn't meant to be true. It wasn't meant to communicate facts. Now, the Rishonim, as Rabbi Meisman verifies, now Rambam says it word for word, in Moses' Torah there's no allegory. There's no allegory. You cannot take the story of the Garden of Eden or the story of the Exodus, some people want to say, only an allegory, didn't happen, didn't have to happen. You can be a perfectly faithful Jew and say, it was just meant to teach you about freedom and slavery and values and so forth and so on. That doesn't meant to, no, there's no allegory. Lo bechidos, mar'eh v'lo mar'ah. Right? Lo bechidos, the Torah says, in the Torah itself, in Be'al Oscha. But in the prophets, you have many allegories. And some of them are about the future. And there you have to know that the words mean what they say, but they can refer to something otherwise. So the Rambam, who holds that our world, the way it's physically structured, will never pass away, that's his position. And there are many verses which talk about the sky falling and the world is consumed in fire and the utter destruction and so forth and so on. And they use the verses against him. One of his supports for his position is, in the prophet Yoel, the same descriptions of destruction are used in the past tense for what happened in his day. The last time I checked, the world did not come to an end in the time of Yoel. So he says, clearly it means political upheaval and economic destruction and so forth and so on. It doesn't mean the skies fall and the earth is dissolved. It's a story to describe phenomena in another area. So allegory you don't have, and that for people who say that they're following the Rambam, there's one fellow who's so proud of following the Rambam. I don't think he reads them in the original even. And he says, when I say it's an allegory, I'm just following the Rambam. It's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. It's very clear about it. So is Sajikon, and so he has a bunch of Rishonim there who all say the same thing. Because it's based on the verses in Mahaloscha. Okay, I guess last question, yeah.
Yeah, so how can there seem to be a prohibition against holding certain beliefs? At least, again, it doesn't seem to be that we choose the beliefs that we hold. So there's a table in front of me, I don't choose to believe it's in front of me, I happen to believe it's in front of me. So at least my understanding, it seems to be there are prohibition against holding certain beliefs.
Yeah, there are. Now, there are at least two answers to this question. One answer is that when you are commanded to be in a certain state, practically what that means is you should do whatever is required to put yourself in that state. How about emotions? We're commanded to have emotions. You can't snap your fingers and just decide to have emotions, but you can do things that will stimulate your emotions. That's one thing that you can do. And then there's something else that you can do in this kind of a case. I want you to imagine the following. You're a junior in college and you have 3 more courses to complete your major, and you have a lot of, you've completed your requirements, and the other courses, of course, you're looking for easy ones to get high marks, to get into medical school. You're sitting in the lectures and trying to pick out what course you'd like to go. So you go into one lecture hall, and the professor says, in this course, we're going to teach you about infinities. In particular, we're going to teach you that there are bigger and smaller infinities. Bigger and smaller infinities. And you think, what? Wait a minute. Infinity means it goes on forever. Are there 2 forevers, 1 further away? I mean, bigger and smaller infinities. And that's just That's crazy. That's not. I'm going to go tell the administration this guy's cheating, He's just pretending to teach. He's telling jokes in class and so on and so on. Then you go into another class, and the professor says, in this course we're going to talk about causation, particularly cases in which the effect comes first and the cause comes afterwards. How is that supposed to work? You need the cause to make the effect, and the cause hasn't happened yet. So how did the effect happen? Well, transfinite mathematics is a well-founded mathematical field. I used to teach it for a living, among other things, and based on the work of Gary Cantor in the 1880s, and it's a whole branch of mathematics. You haven't heard of it. That's what they teach you. They teach you something you don't know. Now do you say, well, what can I do? I just don't believe it, and I can't be responsible for my beliefs. One thing you could say is, this guy's a professor, he's got tenure, he's written textbooks, he probably knows what he's talking about. So that's enough reason for me to think that probably I'm wrong. Same thing with the Feynman-Wheeler effect of backwards, the particles moving backwards in time, so that the cause can be after the effect. This guy is a professor of physics, he probably knows what he's talking about, and that in itself should affect your beliefs. The Torah says you're forbidden to believe this. If you trust the Torah at all, you have a reason for thinking that believing it is a mistake. So it isn't as if you're being asked to jump over a 20-foot building, with your leg muscles, because the very fact that you're told it should have an effect on your belief. So that's two ways that you can react to it. But of course, investigating it is a way to come to know that there's a creator. Rambam says there are certain investigations that you could do, and you could know it in a certain sense, in a certain very qualified sense. I shouldn't say creator. There's a master of the universe. Let's put it that way. It's really the Aristotelian idea. Anyway, I think that belief and emotion, we have mitzvahs for both of them, and that means there have to be ways to choose to act so as to be able to arrive at those conditions that the Torah wants of us. Okay.